They attempted to break her with shackles, with toil, with retribution. And when that proved futile, they sold her over and over and over. 12 times they moved, sending her from one master to the next, each persuaded they would achieve what the prior had not. But Hagar Ashford was not merely strong. She was perceptive, observant, absorbing, and the harder they sought to dominate her, the more formidable she became. Welcome to Untold Enslaved. If you are new to this channel, take a moment to subscribe and like our videos so you never miss the hidden stories that shape the past. We truly appreciate every single one of you who watches and supports this journey into the forgotten corners of history. Tonight's story is one you will not want to miss even a single paragraph of. Stay with us until the very end, because this is not just a story of survival. It is a story of a mind that refused to bow, a woman who turned intelligence into resistance, and a system that could not contain her. So relax, settle in, and let us begin. The auction yard in the year 1860 was never quiet, but that day carried a different kind of noise. Not louder, not chaotic, but tense. The kind of tension that moves beneath conversation, beneath movement, beneath the surface of what appears normal. Buyers stood in small clusters, their voices low but sharp, discussing value, strength, endurance, as if human life could be reduced to measurements and numbers written into a ledger. The enslaved stood in lines, their bodies still, their futures uncertain, their identities already being rewritten before the sale was even complete. It was a place where names were spoken only long enough to be replaced, where memory was treated as something that could be erased with enough distance. Then she stepped forward. Hagar Ashford. She did not look like the others, not because she was untouched by what surrounded her, but because she refused to let it define how she stood within it. She was taller than most, her presence unmistakable, even before her name was called. Her shoulders were straight, not in defiance, but in something deeper, control, awareness. Her eyes did not move the way others did, searching for safety, avoiding attention. They observed, measured, understood, and that alone made people uncomfortable. The auctioneer noticed it immediately. He had seen thousands pass through that yard, had learned to read posture, fear, compliance. He knew how to speak about them, how to present them in ways that increased value, how to hide what needed to be hidden and exaggerate what needed to be sold. But Hagar did not fit into the language he was used to using. There was no easy way to describe her. Strength, yes. Health, yes. But there was something else, something he could not name in a way that would not raise concern. Still, he began. Strong woman, he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Built for labor, capable, experienced. A man stepped forward, studying her closely, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in her posture, her stillness, the way she did not shift under attention. Does she follow orders? He asked. The question hung in the air longer than it should have. The auctioneer hesitated just for a second, then answered. She works. It was not the answer the man had asked for, and everyone knew it. Hagar spoke, not loudly, not with force, but with clarity. I understand orders. The yard went still. A few heads turned. A few men shifted their stance, but she was not finished. I just choose which ones deserve to be followed. Silence settled heavily across the space. The kind that does not come from confusion, but from disruption. The man's expression changed immediately, his interest sharpening, not fading. She will be difficult, he said. The auctioneer forced a small laugh, trying to regain control of the moment. All of them are at first, he replied. But Hagar did not look away, did not lower her gaze, did not correct herself because she had not misspoken. She had stated something she believed, and belief like that was dangerous. The bidding began higher than expected, not because she was easy, but because she was a challenge. And men like that did not walk away from challenges. They tried to conquer them. She was sold for a price that reflected not just her strength, but the risk no one fully understood yet. The first plantation believed in discipline, not just in punishment, but in structure, in routine, in control that extended into every part of a person's life until there was nothing left untouched by it. From the moment Hagar arrived, that system began to test her, not because she challenged it openly, but because she did not respond to it the way others did. She worked. That was never the issue. Her hands moved with strength and precision, her body capable of enduring the physical demands placed upon it. But work alone was not enough. Obedience was required. Submission was expected. And that was where the problem began. She followed instructions when they made sense. When they did not, she did not. The overseer noticed quickly. He had dealt with resistance before, allowed defiance, anger, refusal. Those things could be met directly, punished, broken down over time. But Hagar was different. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue without reason. She did not create disruption for the sake of it. She simply chose, and that choice unsettled him. "You will do as you are told," he said one afternoon, his voice firm, his posture meant to reinforce the structure he represented. Hagar looked at him, not slowly, not hesitantly, directly. "I will do what is right," she replied. The air between them tightened. "You do not decide what is right," he said. She did not move. "That is where you are wrong." There was no anger in her voice, no challenge, just certainty. And certainty is harder to break than defiance. The punishment came. It always did. But it did not produce the expected result. Hagar endured it not with silence meant to hide weakness, but with silence that revealed strength. The kind that does not change under pressure. The kind that does not shift to survive but remains. Within weeks, the decision was made. She was not worth the effort. Too difficult, too independent, too aware. She was sold again. The second plantation believed in control through calculation. Less force, more manipulation. The master there saw something different in Hagar. Not just a problem, but an opportunity. He spoke to her directly. "You are intelligent," he said. She said nothing. "That can be useful," he continued. She met his gaze. "Or dangerous." He smiled slightly. "That depends on you." She shook her head. "No, it depends on you." The conversation ended there. But the balance had already been established. He tried to use her intelligence to guide others to create order. But intelligence that is aware cannot be redirected easily. Hagar did not become what he expected. She did not influence others in the way he wanted. She influenced them differently, quietly, by example, by presence, by refusing to disappear into obedience. Others began to watch her, not openly but carefully. They saw how she moved, how she chose, how she remained herself in a place designed to erase identity, and something began to shift. Small at first, but real. The master saw it and understood. This was not control. This was influence. And it did not belong to him. She was sold again. By the time she was sold the fourth time, her name had begun to carry weight. Not widely, not openly, but enough. Hagar Ashford, the woman who could not be controlled, the one who worked but did not submit, the one who listened but did not obey blindly. Some refused to buy her at all. Others sought her out to test themselves, to prove something, to win. But this was not something that could be won, because Hagar was not fighting them. She was refusing to become what they expected. And that is something no system is built to handle. By the time she was sold the 12th time, she had become more than a person being traded. She had become a question, one no one could answer. What happens when a human being refuses to surrender their mind? By the time Hagar Ashford arrived at the 5th plantation, she was no longer seen as just another purchase. Her name had begun to move ahead of her, carried quietly from one place to another, not as open warning, but as cautious conversation. Men spoke of her in measured tones, careful not to reveal uncertainty, but unable to hide it completely. She was strong, yes, capable, yes, but that was not what made her different. It was her mind, the way she observed before acting, the way she listened without appearing to submit, the way she made decisions in silence. And silence, when it comes from awareness rather than fear, is something that unsettles even those who believe they hold power. The man who bought her this time believed himself different. He was not the type to rely only on force. He believed in control through structure, through making people depend on the system rather than fight against it. When Hagar arrived, he did not rush to test her. He watched. Days passed before he spoke to her directly, observing how she worked, how she moved, how others responded to her presence. What he saw confirmed what he had heard. She worked well, efficiently, without hesitation, when the task made sense. But there were moments, small but clear, when she chose differently, when she adjusted a process, when she ignored an unnecessary command, when she acted in a way that was not expected but still effective. He approached her one evening, his tone calm, his posture controlled. "You do not like to be told what to do," he said. Hagar looked at him. Not challenging, not avoiding, simply present. "I listen," she replied. He studied her. "That is not the same thing." She did not disagree. "No," she said, "it is not." There was no confrontation in the exchange. No raised voices, but something passed between them that made Ken clear's throat, the difference clear. He was used to shaping behavior. She was used to deciding her own, and those two things do not exist easily in the same space. At first, he allowed it. He believed he could guide her, slowly bring her into alignment with what he needed. But influence does not always move in the direction expected. The others began to notice her more closely. Not because she spoke to them directly, but because of how she carried herself. She did not rush. She did not react out of fear. She moved with intention, and intention, when observed repeatedly, becomes something others begin to understand. One afternoon, a younger man hesitated before following an order that made little sense. It was a small moment, easy to overlook, but it happened, and it did not happen before Hagar arrived. The master noticed, and that was enough. Within weeks, the pattern became clear. Not loud, not organized, but present. People were thinking more, pausing more, choosing more carefully. It was not rebellion. Not in the way it could be easily punished. It was something quieter, something harder to reach, and it was spreading. Hagar was sold again. The sixth plantation did not believe in patience. They believed in force. The moment Hagar arrived, the tone was different. There was no observation period, no attempt to understand, only immediate expectation, immediate control, immediate pressure to conform. The overseer made that clear from the first day. His voice loud, his movement sharp, his authority expressed through intensity rather than calculation. "You will follow every order," he said. Hagar listened as she always did. But listening is not the same as submission. The work began harder, more demanding, less structured, designed not just to produce labor, but to break resistance. Hagar worked. She always worked, but she did not break. Days passed. Then weeks. The overseer grew frustrated. He was used to visible results, to change, to signs that pressure was working. But Hagar did not show those signs. She did not collapse into obedience. She did not react in ways that gave him control. She remained steady, unchanged in the ways that mattered. So he pushed harder. More pressure, more punishment, more attempts to force a reaction. But reaction is not the same as change. And Hagar understood that. One evening after a long day of work, he approached her again. His patience gone, his frustration clear. "You think you are stronger than this place?" he said. Hagar looked at him, not with anger, not with defiance, with clarity. "No," she said. "I think differently than this place." The distinction mattered, but he did not understand it. And because he did not understand it, he could not control it. The decision was made quickly. She was not worth the effort. She was sold again. By the 7th and 8th sales, something had become undeniable. It was not just that Hagar could not be controlled. It was that she changed the space around her. Not loudly, not through direct influence, but through presence. People began to think more when she was near, to question quietly, to hesitate before acting without reason, to recognize that obedience without thought was not the only way to exist. And that recognition was dangerous. The system depended on predictability, on repetition, on the absence of independent thought. Hagar disrupted that without ever raising her voice, without ever organizing, without ever declaring anything. She simply existed as someone who refused to surrender her mind. And that was enough. By the 9th, 10th, and 11th sales, her reputation had grown beyond individual plantations. Traders spoke of her carefully. Buyers approached with caution. Some refused outright. Others bought her out of pride to prove they could succeed where others had failed. They all failed. Not because she resisted loudly, but because she remained consistent, and consistency, when it does not align with control, becomes something that cannot be shaped. By the time she was sold the 12th time, the system had begun to recognize something it could not fix. Hagar Ashford was not broken. She was not rebellious in the way they understood. She was not defiant for the sake of resistance. She was something else entirely, a mind that could not be owned. And that was something they had no answer for. By the time Hagar Ashford reached the 12th plantation, she was no longer seen as an investment. She was a question no one wanted to answer, but everyone felt forced to confront. Her reputation had moved faster than she had. Carried through traders, whispered between buyers, passed along with a tone that was never fully confident. Strong, they said, capable, they admitted, but difficult. Not in the way that could be corrected, not in the way that could be punished into submission. Difficult in a way that made control uncertain. The man who purchased her did not pretend otherwise. He had heard the stories, all of them, and unlike the others, he did not buy her to prove something. He bought her because he wanted to understand something. And that difference, though subtle, changed everything from the moment she arrived. The plantation itself was different from the others. Not softer, not kinder, but quieter. The kind of quiet that comes from long-standing order rather than constant enforcement. The workers moved with routine, not urgency. The overseers spoke less, watched more. It was a place where control existed, not just through force, but through structures so deeply embedded that it no longer needed to announce itself. When Hagar stepped onto that land, she noticed it immediately. Not the buildings, not the fields, the pattern, the rhythm, the way everything functioned without disruption. Clear's throat, and for the first time since her first sale, she paused. Not physically, but mentally, because this place was not built to break resistance. It was built to absorb it. The master did not meet her right away. He watched first. Days passed as he observed her from a distance, noting how she worked, how she moved, how she interacted without ever appearing to engage directly. She did what was required. Clear's throat no more, no less. She did not test boundaries. She did not push against orders unnecessarily. But she did not disappear into them either. She remained present, aware, separate in a way that could not be easily explained, but was impossible to ignore. Others noticed it too, not because she told them anything, but because she did not carry the same tension. And tension, when absent in a place built on it, becomes visible. When he finally approached her, it was without announcement. No audience, no display of authority, just a man walking towards someone he had decided to understand rather than control. "You have been sold many times," he said. Hagar looked at him. "Yes." He nodded slightly. "That usually means something is wrong." She did not respond immediately. Then she spoke. "It means something does not fit." The answer settled between them. Not confrontational, not defensive, just clear. He studied her for a moment longer. "And what is it that does not fit?" he asked. She met his gaze without hesitation. "Your system expects obedience without thought. I do not function that way." The difference between this plantation and the others became clearer over time. There was no immediate attempt to force her into compliance beyond what was necessary. No escalation of punishment. No effort to break her in the ways others had tried. Instead, there was observation, adjustment. A quiet attempt to understand what could not be easily controlled. The master changed small things around her, not to accommodate her, but to see how she responded. Tasks shifted, expectations adjusted slightly. Not enough to disrupt the structure, but enough to test whether her resistance was rooted in defiance or in something deeper. Hagar responded the same way she always had. She worked when the work made sense. She followed instructions when they aligned with purpose. She ignored what did not. But here something different happened. Instead of immediate punishment, there was pause. A moment where the system itself seemed to hesitate, unsure of how to respond to something that did not follow its rules, but did not fully oppose them either. That hesitation created space, small at first, almost invisible, but real. And in that space, others began to notice something they had not seen before. Not rebellion, not freedom, but the possibility of thought existing without immediate consequence. One man hesitated before completing a task that had always been done without question. Another adjusted his approach, choosing efficiency over blind repetition. These were not acts of defiance. They were acts of awareness. And awareness spreads quietly. It does not need instruction. It does not require permission. It only needs to be seen once to exist again. The shoe clear's throat overseers noticed. Of course they did. But their response was slower, less certain, because the changes were not disruptive enough to punish directly. And yet they were changing something fundamental. The master saw it clearly. What he had purchased was not just a person who could not be controlled. It was a presence that altered how others thought without ever speaking to them. And that was something far more dangerous than open resistance. Open resistance can be crushed. Quiet awareness cannot be easily reached. He stood one evening watching the field, his gaze fixed not on Hagar alone, but he clears throat on the subtle shifts happening around her. "You are changing them," he said when he finally approached her again. Hagar did not look surprised. "No," she replied. "They are changing themselves." The system began to strain not loudly but internally. The kind of strain that does not break structures immediately, but weakens them over time. The overseers grew more watchful, their movements tighter, their voices sharper when addressing groups rather than individuals. They sensed something was shifting, but could not isolate it. There was no clear source, no single act of rebellion, no direct cause, only a pattern that no longer followed the lines they were used to enforcing. Here remained at the center of it without ever placing herself there. She did not gather people. She did not speak in groups. She did not attempt to organize anything. And yet everything seemed to move differently around her. People began to look at situations before reacting, to consider before obeying, to understand before repeating. It was not enough to dismantle the system. Not yet. But it was enough to make it unstable. And instability once introduced does not disappear. The master found himself facing something he had not expected. Not resistance, not defiance, but limitation. The realization that control, even when carefully constructed, has boundaries. And those boundaries become visible when something exists outside of them, without directly opposing them. He approached Hagar one final time with a question that carried more weight than any command he had given before. "If you cannot be controlled," he said, "then what are you?" Hagar looked at him, her expression unchanged. "A person who thinks," she answered. The simplicity of it unsettled him more than anything else had, because it revealed something he could not argue against. The plantation did not collapse in a single moment. It did not erupt into chaos or fall apart visibly. It changed slowly, the way all systems change, when something fundamental within them is no longer stable. The structure remained, the routines continued, but the certainty that had once defined it began to fade. And without certainty, control becomes effort. And effort over time weakens. Hagar was not sold again, not because she had been fixed, but because she could no longer be placed elsewhere without carrying the same effect. She had become something the system could not relocate. Not a problem to solve, but a reality to face. The master stopped trying to understand how to control her. Instead, he began to understand what she represented. Not rebellion, not disobedience, but awareness. The one thing the system was never built to handle. And once awareness exists, it cannot be removed. It can only spread slowly, quietly, until it reaches a point where the structure around it must either change or break. Hagar Ashford remained not as someone who fought the system directly, but as someone who exposed its limits simply by existing, and sometimes is the most powerful resistance of all. The change did not stay contained within the boundaries of that plantation. Systems like that depend on isolation to survive, on the belief that each place exists on its own